Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's such a pleasure today to be here with Santa Barbara City Councilman Oscar Gutierrez, who has been a real big player in the budget discussions and is the representative of the West Side on the City Council. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about all things City of Santa Barbara, budget, State Street, housing, all the issues that are sort of dominating the conversation right now. Thanks a lot for taking some time. How's everything going, Oscar?
Thank you, Josh, for allowing me to be on your show. Now that the budget's been, decided on, things are kind of mellowing out a little bit. We have until Tuesday to finally ratify it completely for this coming year. But it was pretty stressful. It was tense. There was a lot of differing of opinions and a lot of hot button issues that we had to get through, but I feel pretty confident that we made some pretty sound decisions.
Yeah, let me ask you, I wrote a lot for News Hawk about the various aspects. Let me just ask you, what were the issues, challenges, issues of concern going into the budget that you were most focused on? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for me, this past year, there have been some active violence in our community that mainly involved our youth, and it really made me more passionate about making sure that we're doing our part to address that. And at our council retreat that we had at the beginning of the year, I made youth-related issues are my top 3 priorities for the community. And when it came to the proposed budget that city staff presented to us, they were suggesting cutting funding to youth programs that we had, which to me was like the exact opposite of what I was asking for. So I got pretty upset and passionate about it, and I said some pretty aggressive things on the dais, which I apologize for now, because in retrospect, like I was pretty upset. I was upset at my city staff for even proposing it. Just to put it in context, I was upset with city staff and us as council members in general for not doing enough for the youth already. And then they come to us saying, okay, we're going to do less for them now. And I was just like, well, this is not what we need, So in doing so, we reached out to other partners in the community, like the school board. And there was some back and forth as to when to meet. We asked in January, and I believe we initially agreed to meet at some time in March, but then there was scheduling conflicts, and then that fell through. And then now we're scheduled, or potentially scheduled, to meet in August. And the whole purpose of us trying to meet in January was so that we would have a plan for the youth during the summer, that we would work things out together to see where we could fill in the gaps to address the youth, help the youth for the summer. But now we're not going to meet until after the summer. And luckily my colleagues and I decided to allocate funding to keep those after school programs going for at least this year. But now we have to come up with a plan for how we're going to continually fund these programs and future programs the coming years. So I'm looking forward to meet with the school board and coming up with a collaboration on what they're doing, what we're doing, where we could fill in the gaps, where we can help each other out, and just better serve the youth in our community to try to avoid all the challenges that our youth are facing.
And can you talk about what the programs actually were? I know that we're talking about summer, after school, evenings, places for students to go, and then what the issue was. Why would Parks and Rec even suggest cutting a program that serves the most vulnerable? But I don't even mean that in a negative way. I mean, that is Santa Barbara. I mean, Santa Barbara is working class people living east side, west side, all over the place. Why would they even suggest cutting a program like
So yeah, our finance director and his great team of staff, all they do is study the numbers and go through every budget that our departments have to present and try to make sure that we get informed to make the best financial decision for the city as possible. So in doing so, they are forecasting that we're going to have a $3 million deficit going into next year. So to prepare for that, they were asking us and every department to make cuts in order to avoid going into the negative with the city funding. So in doing so, Parks and Rec looked at what they consider the most necessary things that had to be funded, and they came up with the after school program as one of them that they could cut. But again, all departments were asked to cut things, so every department was asked to make some pretty hard decisions, and that was one of them for the Parks and Rec team. And yeah, I was pretty upset about it, and I, not just me, but also my colleagues were, and we just felt like we couldn't do it because we know the value. There's been so many studies done about how after school programs can really change the path of children growing up, and some of the parents reached out to us and said, please don't do this. We don't have many other options, and we just couldn't do it. So we chose not to defund it, but yeah, that's the reason why. It's because we're trying to avoid going into a $3 million deficit, and obviously making some cuts would help avoid that.
Yeah, and there was that Monroe after school program that was initially on the table, and the council voted to save it and use reserve funds to continue that program. I want to ask you about Councilmember Kristen Sneddon, because she took a really strong stand. She put herself out there. She basically said, I think your projections are too conservative, that we can expect that it's not going to be this bad. So I need you to revise this and let's figure out a way to fund these programs. And that's unusual. That's rare. A lot of times there's a huge amount of deference to the financial experts, the staff. And so when you put yourself out there, and from Sneddon's perspective, you run the risk of looking unsophisticated, looking as though you don't understand the numbers, the budget, being political, right? All those things. It's much easier to kind of just go with what the staff says. What did you think, Oscar, of what she did in terms of the attention she brought to the transparency of the process?
I honestly appreciated it. I know that certain people were pretty critical of her for doing that, but it is our role, right, as elected representatives, to make sure that we're looking at what city staff is presenting to us and making sure that it's accurate and making sure that they're being transparent with us, because this is the funding that runs the city, and the way that she worded it, I personally think it was pretty articulate and professional. I mean, I'm from the West Side, right? And sometimes I need to catch myself on the way that I just want to respond to something off the cuff. So like, if I were going to comment on what she was commenting on, I probably wouldn't have been as articulate as she was. I might have said some stuff that I would have regretted later. But I appreciated her bringing it up because, yeah, sometimes I look at things and I'm wondering, are they using the word potential as basically saying maybe this will happen or maybe not? So then it makes me think, well, how accurate is this? And so so yeah, I don't falter at all for the questioning, because that is our role, is to question city staff and hold them accountable. And yeah, there's been a lot of issues where, that's why I brought up the whole school district meeting with city staff, because I wanted to know, like, why is there a delay? Is it on our end or what's going on? So yeah, I want to make sure our city staff is being transparent as well, and why is there a delay?
Yeah. And do you think about what Kristen did, for better or worse, whether you agree with her or not agree with her, had she not done that, the budget could have played out differently. Some of
Mhm.
the stuff could not have been saved. And the issue with the city and the district and scheduling a meeting, that is something that needs to happen, obviously. And I think hopefully the decision makers there, whoever's in charge, will get beyond the territorial disputes of who's busier, or whether you're going into a meeting as fully prepared as you need to be or not, and just have the meeting and hash it out. Because obviously the benefit is the students, the kid. If it's going to happen in August, well, that's at least it's happening. Yes, to
Yeah.
some degree.
Yeah.
Oscar,
No.
go ahead.
uh,
Go ahead.
Yeah. No. I do want to say that I really respect the school board and the school district, because they get a lot of criticism and judgment, and not enough thanks, to be honest. So like, I know that my comments were pretty heated, so I just want to give them the respect that they deserve, because it is kind of like a thankless job, and they're going through a lot. They're really struggling, and I'm trying I just want to work with them. That's the thing, is like, I just want to work closer together. And I guess I get a little too anxious and eager, because yeah, I don't like knowing that I grew up with more access to certain things like our parks or our schools than the kids now. That bothers me. I really don't like that. I think that they deserve and they should have access to the schools and our parks. And that's why I made suggestions like no more new fences on our city parks, because a lot of these parks have never had fences. So right now we're talking that out with Parks and Rec about how we can address security and also just the overall maintenance and longevity of our parks without fencing. So that's going to come up next year for sure.
It's really interesting because from an urban planning perspective, of course, you're thinking, how do we make this community as safe as possible? There's issues with people. Maybe we should put a barrier. Let's put a fence around it. But what's interesting about you is you're a local kid. You grew up here and you have been to Ortega Park. You've been to every park in town. And so you know what it's like to experience it beyond a big picture budget perspective. You've lived it. And so I think that's one of the benefits of someone like you being on the council. You could say, yeah, fence sounds good, but really you're going to be keeping not only people who might be loitering or doing drugs and all that bad stuff, but you might be just keeping some introvert kid and family out, and they just need a place to play because they don't have backyards. And I
Yeah.
think people need to be constantly reminded that not everybody has a backyard. Not everybody, I mean, probably kids in Santa Barbara have been to the beach, but we know there's lots of kids in California who've never been to the beach, right? Who
Yeah.
don't know how to swim, who don't know how to ride bikes, who, particularly in the Latino community. So you have to constantly be able to remind people of that if you have a master's degree and you're a department head and you're planning, that's fantastic. But you have to see it from the perspective of the people who grew up in this community. And I think that's why you do a good service there, bringing those issues, and I don't know if you want to talk about the fence issue at Ortega Park, but why is that an issue? Like, why not just fence the park and make sure the only people who go in are people who are, not making not loitering, why is that a problem?
It's just psychologically, when you see a fence or a gate or a wall, it has an effect on you that you're not welcome, that you're not allowed in there, or you need permission to be in there. And the way that I was raised and the way that I see it now is that these are public parks that are paid by our tax dollars, and we should have access to them within reason. You mentioned how some kids in California haven't been to the beach. Well, it's even more local than that. I talked to Greg Gorga, the head of the Maritime Museum, and they have a program where they bring kids to an old sailing ship and teach them what it was like to work on an old sailing ship in the 1800s. And there was a few kids that he told me that came and to be a part of the program that had said they'd never been to the beach before. And it was just like heartbreaking when he told me that. I couldn't believe it. So then when I hear proposals of like putting up fencing and stuff, again, I understand the logic that they want to keep the kids safe. They want to preserve the park. But I could tell you that, like, I've seen several times just driving around town throughout the years, if somebody wants to get in the park, a fence and a wall is not going to stop them. They're just going to jump over it. And when they were asking us to make budget cuts to save money, I know how expensive it is to buy materials and then pay a crew to construct a fence or a wall of some sort. And it just seemed like, since these parks haven't had fences and walls around them historically, why put them up now? There's alternatives, right? Or we can come to some kind of understanding, because like Oak Park, they don't have a fence around the majority of the park, only around the pool, which makes sense. But they have boulders that line the entire park to keep cars from driving up on the grass and what have you. So maybe we could come to a compromise like that, because I think if it's public land, then we should keep it open to the public. And my girlfriend got her master's in Scotland, and the Scottish people have this law there called the right to roam. So there's literally a law saying that it's almost like there's no such thing as trespassing in Scotland. Like, you can literally walk into any park or anywhere that's public, and you can't be harassed by the law as long as you're not doing anything illegal. And when I was there and visited it, I thought that was like really awesome that they took the leadership of that country, made it a law saying that, hey, you can't stop somebody from going on public land, So I don't know. That's just kind of like my overall sense of it, And yeah, I missed the days when I was a kid and it was Saturday morning or Sunday, and I would go to the schools and see my friends playing there, and we could play there. But now it's not like that, yeah, again, I just feel bad for the kids not being able to have access to that kind of lifestyle that I had growing up.
Well, it looks like for this budget cycle anyway, that the council figured out a way to create funding. And so now larger long range conversations will happen to determine how to go forward. So you're in a much better place than you were going into budget season as it relates to this. I wanted to talk to you, Oscar, about you and your role in the council before we get to State Street and some housing issues. Last time we talked about you fitting in, feeling accepted, staff responding to you. We talked a little bit about what it's like to be, Mexican American, and when you speak your mind, and I can relate to this. People think we're angry. We're not necessarily angry, but it's just how we talk. And so we have to dial things back in order to be heard, and it's this extra layer of things that a lot of people don't have to deal with. And I see that every week. I mean, I see that every week in what you do and what you talk about and that sort of thing. But can you talk about your role in the council and what's working, what's not working? And, you are a product of district elections. So talk about how that fits into your ability to be the best council member you can be.
Yeah, the whole concept of district elections is so that the local elected leaders have a better representation of the population that live there. And I feel like I've taken that really to heart, and I want to make sure that not just my district, but the city overall knows that were responsive and accessible. So I've gone out of my way, and made sure I try to show up to as many public events that I'm invited to as possible, so that people can see me out in public and address issues or share ideas with me there, because I know how hard it is to try to get down to City Hall and talk to me at City Hall. Or I also know how hard it is to try to find my contact information online or what have you. So I try to show up to as many events as possible so that people can talk to me in person right then and there. And also, yeah, like online, I try to be on as many platforms as possible. So I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Nextdoor, Reddit, TikTok. I respond to everyone as much as possible on those platforms, because again, I know that's what the people use to communicate and to share ideas and share their concerns, voice their opinions. And I read the comments and I respond. And you're right, growing up on the West Side, similar on the East Side as well, I've had to kind of rewire my brain when it comes to communication, because I'm used to having to respond off the cuff, like in the moment. Because growing up, if somebody said something to you and you didn't respond right then and there, like it was a sign of weakness, and people would either disrespect you more or just flat out ignore you completely. So it's taken me a while to try to like rewire that part of my brain to like not just have like a knee-jerk reaction to something somebody has said, and try to like think it out first before I respond. And obviously I've been successful in some moments and not in others, but it's just something, of being a product of where I was raised. And some people appreciate it. They will, the locals will kind of comment like, hey, you're the one that keeps it real, and I'm like, yeah, but also some of my closest friends and mentors are like, hey, be a little more professional, they'll give me comments like that. So like, it all depends on, how you're viewing it, I guess. But yeah, I'm not sure. So like, I'm trying to be careful about stating this, but like, I think I might be the most responsive council member ever. I can go through all my emails that I've sent and all the responses on social media. But the reason I say that is because, it was something that I told myself when I got elected, that I was going to respond to everyone no matter what. And at first, people were kind of saying like, why do you do that? Some people don't care. They just kind of want to vent in an email and they'll just send it to you. And I was like, I don't know. They took the time. At least the least I can do is let them know that I read it, and it's taken a couple years, but now almost every time I go out somewhere, a complete stranger I've never seen before will come up to me and say, you're the only one that responded to me. I just want to thank you, and now it makes it worth it. Like it makes all that time I set aside to answer those hundreds of emails sometimes in a single day worth it, because, at the very least, the people should know that their elected leaders are reading what they have to say, listening to them, and get a response from them, So yeah, I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job on that sense, and I always feel like I could be doing better. So I try to meet as many people as I can when I can, and encourage them to always like reach out to me and send me an email so that I have a record of it and I can try to address it with the correct people. And yeah, so I feel like when it comes to representation, I feel like I'm doing a good job on that front for sure.
Yeah, you're Mr. Reddit for sure. I'm not even on Reddit, but whenever I go on it, like, oh, Oscar shared a link, kind of thing, Mr. Social Media. When you were elected, Cathy Murillo was mayor, and she was an ally. She helped you. You were an ally of hers. Damn party people. And then now Randy's mayor. So can you talk about? Do you feel more accepted now with Randy? Less accepted? Has anything changed at all in terms of? I mean, you're not Cathy's shadow anymore. Like you're on your own. So can you talk a little bit about some of the differences there?
Well, Cathy, first of all, she was like a colleague to me because I worked for TV Santa Barbara for years, and she was a journalist at the time, so we would cross paths. She would come into TVSB and produce some stuff, and then we were neighbors. She ended up moving into my neighborhood, and we lived just like a block away from each other. And then she kind of became my mentor, right, by helping me run for office and working with me on the council. So I have like tremendous respect, and I learned a lot from her, even and I mean this with all due respect, like even like the errors that she may have done, I learned from that, right? Like I learned like, okay, don't do that, you know. And the same goes with like my older siblings, right? As much as I love them, you know, no one's perfect, so they made errors, and I learned like, okay, don't do what my older brother did or my older sister did. So and I view kind of Cathy like that, you know. With Randy, he's, you know, a very cordial person. He's very professional. He's a businessman, right? So like that's kind of the relationship we have. We obviously don't agree on most things, I want to say, or you know, maybe we do actually. But yeah, there's definitely not so much of like a brother sister relationship that I had with Cathy that I do with Randy. Randy's more of just like, he's a businessman, you know, but he's definitely like a human encyclopedia of local knowledge, because he's been here since the 60s and he ran a successful business, and he knows a lot of people, and he knows a lot of history as to why certain things are the way they are. So when I need a reference like that, I go to Randy, and Randy knows, like, I would hear, you know, is it true that there's a certain type of business that existed here? And he'll be like, oh yeah, that place existed. And yeah, it was interesting. It was a certain time in space, and yeah, we had a market for that, but not anymore. And yeah, so he's very knowledgeable for sure.
Yeah, one of the things I like about Randy is he'd still get mad at me like Cathy would, but Cathy oddly would just like shut me out, like just stop talking for a while, and then she'd act like nothing ever happened. Whereas Randy will send me an email and, hey, I don't like this. You're wrong. Have a great weekend. Like it was always just self-contained in that moment. And so from a journalist perspective, that's probably more effective in terms of this, communications and professional relationship building. Um, do you feel, Oscar, that you're taken more seriously today than you were the last time we talked? We talked about emails being returned from staff, phone calls being returned, colleagues valuing your contributions. Are things better now?
I would say, yeah, you know, there's a certain grace period where you kind of have to learn each other's characters, I guess, and how they operate. You have to understand their madness in a weird way of saying it. You know, each one of us has our strengths, right? Like Megan's an attorney, Kristen's a professor, Mike knows insurance policies very well, and Eric, you know, he knows how higher office policy making works, but he also knows how business works, and then so does Randy, and we all got our strength. Alejandra's very close to the community, Latino and Latina community, and the families. Like, she really knows how to get in contact with them, and how to get them to show up to things. So we all have our certain strengths, and we lean on each other on those strengths now. I've noticed, like, if I have a legal question, I'm more likely to go to Megan. If I have a question about policy, I'll go to Eric. If I have a question about negotiating unions, I'll go to Mike. You know, that. So, and then they come to me with different questions as well. But yeah, you know, there's been a lot of turnover with city staff, and I, you know, with the amount of correspondence I had with city staff, I think they weren't used to that with previous council members. I don't think they were as responsive as I was. And I'm just saying this, I don't know for sure, so if I'm wrong, I apologize. But that's the vibe I look back and I see now, cuz yeah, city staff was definitely like, I kind of got this like response of like, you're kind of emailing us a lot. And I was kind of sitting there like, well, isn't that what I'm supposed to do? You know, like, aren't I supposed to be communicating with you about the needs of the people? So I think now that they know, I'm sure I've got a reputation, like Oscar's going to email you like 10 times a day at least, you know, and I'm sure like they're used to that. So now they're pretty responsive. They for the most part, they tend to respond to me pretty quickly, or respond to the people pretty quickly. And yeah, I guess there were just like a little bit of growing pains, you know, of like just understanding people's methods and such. And I would say definitely now I feel heard. I mean, there's obviously still moments like the whole youth engagement thing where I'm like, when are we going to do this? You know, there's still moments like that, but all the council members have their own specific issues that I'm sure they feel like aren't getting addressed fast or quickly as they like. So for the most part, I'm pretty content. And I feel like, yeah, you know, when I was first elected, there was this stigma that was kind of put on me as being like Cathy's lackey or whatever. And I personally feel like it's unfair because I said it like a million times. If you talk to my former professors and teachers and ask them if I was like a yes man or a follower, they would all laugh hysterically saying like, no, he was a pain in our ass because he wouldn't follow our rules, you know? So that persona was kind of put out there and people kind of ate it up. And I would assume maybe even city staff probably did too. But then slowly I had to like basically check a lot of people and finally get what I feel like is the same treatment as most council members or city staff.
Yeah, definitely. You've definitely asserted yourself to a point where I think they respect you a lot more than maybe the first couple of years you were in office. I wanted to talk to you about State Street, and this will kind of correlate a little bit to what you mentioned a few minutes ago. But that State Street master plan meeting where the consultant was there, you actually like responded to Peter Lewis, developer, because Peter Lewis was making these comments about how this is the first time I've ever heard that the staff wants to make State Street a bicycle thoroughfare. And then later on in the meeting, you kind of, you talked and you said, why are you acting surprised? Like we've been talking about how to make State Street more bicycle friendly for a long time. And it's not helpful. And you must not be, I'm summarizing you, you can speak for yourself, but basically I was thinking like, are you paying attention? Like, how can you sit there and say this at this point? And that was one of those examples where, you mentioned thinking about before you just instantly say something was you came across there as sort of like kind of intense, right? And so some people might be thinking, chill out, Oscar, right? But where if somebody like Megan Harmon said it, they might be like, wow, how brilliant, how smart, But you actually got an ovation from the crowd. They like actually started applauding. Let's plan for the future. So can you talk about that moment and why you said it, and then just give me kind of your vision for State Street and how we're going to deal with all these clash of community interests?
Yeah, thanks. Just to give a little more context, in my statements, I stated how even before I got elected, right, when I was studying the issues for the city, one of the first things that was presented to me was the bicycle master plan and all the vision plans that we have for the community, and having bicycling and non-car related transportation become a priority for the future of the city was always in the forefront. And again, it's been happening for years, even before I decided to run for council. And so when I heard them so shocked that bicycling was going to be a major part of the replan for State Street, I was legitimately confused, because I was like, how do you guys not know this? Like, some of you have lived here longer than I have. Some of you have interacted with the city and elected officials longer than I have. And this was something that continually comes up every year. So like, how was this already not in your minds when you're thinking about the future of State Street. And I think I even said, like, I'm concerned and alarmed. And it's true. I was like, well, what is happening? Like, we appointed those people because we see them as trendsetters, as leaders, and as visionaries, right? And the tone and some of the comments I heard at that meeting, that wasn't what was being reflected to me when I was watching them and listening to them. I was like, whoa, what is happening right now? This is not what I thought this whole committee was supposed to be doing, you know? So yeah, I went up there and kind of voiced my opinion because, you know, it's a growing issue that we need to address, especially if we're going to have housing on State Street. You know, the state passed a law saying that the developers don't have to build parking anymore for the new housing that they're building. So like, if we're going to allow State Street to have more housing on it, they're most likely not going to provide parking. So like, how are those people going to get around? You got to give them alternate modes of transportation, and bicycling is going to be one of them. So for them to be so alarmed at the fact that there is going to be non-car related transportation methods on State Street was a little alarming to me. Now, they did make it clear that they weren't necessarily anti-bike. They were just shocked that they weren't allowed to see these drawings before the meeting. So that I kind of get, like, yeah, they probably felt blindsided, you know? But still, like, the whole notion of them not already having it in their heads was a little alarming to me. And I guarantee you, if you ask each and every one of them if they're environmentalists, they would probably say yes. So again, I was kind of like, why is this a shock to you? If you're already believing in this, then you should already be thinking it in a way. So yeah, I did go up there and I was kind of upset, kind of going like, what is happening? Like, why do we have to explain this to you? Why does staff have to like defend themselves as opposed to like just explain and present something to you, you know? That's the part where I kind of like got a little excited, I guess you can say. And yeah, I got applause, which I was honestly shocked. I was like, oh, I didn't expect people to applaud me for that. But yeah, it was an interesting meeting, and yeah, it's just something that I feel like is very important in our community, and it's going to become further important. So we have to start making plans for it to address it.
There were some bike activists in the room, so I think they were impressed. You were talking about, go to UCSB. Yes, the first time you're on UCSB, you're like, holy cow, there's a ton of bikes. But 30 minutes later, like, oh, you get how it works, and I think that was sort of your point. Not 30 minutes, but very shortly after.
Yeah, it takes time because, yeah, it was a culture shock for me to go to UCSB. And literally, you can go anytime when there's school in session at noon. Go at noon, at 12 o'clock. You'll literally see tens of thousands of people navigating that campus through bicycles, scooters, skateboards, rollerblades, you name it. They have it there. And again, it took a couple of days to get used to it. But then I was able to get through the campus practically with my eyes closed because you get used to it. And that's what I think is happening with State Street. That people aren't used to having so many bicycles out there at once, and honestly, the bicyclists do have to be educated, and I do believe that the bad bicyclists, they have to be fined, and they have to have law enforced on them, because I'm sick of it too. I ride my bike out there, and I have some people like cutting me off and doing stupid stuff, knocking things over. And they're making all of us look bad, and I'm sick of it. And I've been working with the bicycling groups and activists to try to mitigate that issue. But I think we have to be more aggressive. I think that, I remember in high school, I took driver's ed in school. I think maybe the school should start teaching how to bicycle and have it be a course. Some people are asking us to pass an ordinance saying that you have to be 16 and older to ride a bicycle. I'm willing to explore that 100%, because again, it is a safety issue, and I do feel like we need to start enforcing the law because they're making us all look bad.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely tough. I'm down there sometimes with my daughter, and I hold her hand tight when I see a bike coming because you assume they're going to see her, but maybe they won't.
Right.
Hey, what is your goal for State Street? I know you talk about the 400 block and advocating for some of the businesses there because we still do have cars on that street and they've been treated maybe a little bit differently, not as favorably. If you could sort of talk to MIG, I mean, you're the council, you're ultimately going to be making the decision. But if you could kind of just say, here's what we're going to do, what do you want State Street to look like?
I want it to be as equitable as possible. Like a lot of business owners on State Street and community members have said that like the 500 block have gotten the cream of the crop. Like they're getting the most attention, and obviously that's where the bulk of the foot traffic goes to because there's so many restaurants and bars on that block. The 400 block, I've been saying since I've been elected, has been neglected by the city, and I've been trying to get city staff and my colleagues to give it a little more attention. But they say it needs to be the way that it is because emergency vehicles need access to State Street, to and from State Street from that block, and the flow of traffic. And I've suggested things like making the traffic go two ways again there so that it could flow better. But there seems to always be a reason why they don't get as much attention as the other blocks. State Street as a whole, right? Like one of the comments I heard was, why are we giving so much priority to restaurants when all these blocks don't have restaurants on it? Well, just because some of the blocks don't have restaurants now doesn't mean they won't in the future. And I want them to be as interchangeable as possible. Like, so if right now, if there's a storefront that's a shoe store, like, and they leave, then I want it so that a potential business owner can go in there and be like, well, I want to make this into a restaurant, and they could have that access to do that, so I kind of want State Street to be as adaptable as possible, all throughout the street so that it's not subject to just one block. Well, this one block is where the restaurants and the bars are. This one block is where the clothing store is. Like, it should be kind of like, every other or what have you. It should be way more interchangeable than it is now. And obviously have less vacancies, because I think maybe that's one of the reasons why they are vacant, is because a potential business owner goes in there and they see like, oh, I can't make this into a restaurant. I'm going to have to do all this construction. And we all know how hard that is. And yeah, I feel like that limits the ability of property owners to rent out their spots.
You think State Street could be smaller in terms of the amount of blocks that are closed to cars? Like, could you see a scenario where the 5 to 900 block is closed, but everything else is open to cars? Do you see something like that, or do you just say, cars, they can go on Chapala, they can go on Santa Barbara Street. State Street needs to be for pedestrians and bicyclists. What do you think? Is there room for a return to cars? For a portion of it.
Some of the plans did show that there would be like a one-way street option for State Street going down towards the beach. That we need to have it so that it's adaptable for as much as possible, right? Because emergency vehicles need to be able to have access to it. So it does have to be able to allow vehicles on there. And one idea that was thrown out was, at least have it so that the electric trolleys can go on State Street and take people up and down State Street. So that's something for sure. Like vehicles, yeah, maybe we could have it so that only emergency vehicles and the trolleys can go on there. That I'm willing to definitely explore. But the cars, like so many people the majority of the people I speak to have told me that they really like that there's no cars on there. So yeah, I would have to obviously hear from my other colleagues about what their residents are telling them. But right now, I think emergency vehicles and the public transportation like a trolley would be completely acceptable on State Street in the future.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about housing. And this is Eric Friedman's district, but everybody on the council has to decide everything. But lots of drama over La Cumbre Plaza and whether the city should create a specific plan and plan for that whole area holistically. Instead, we've got a developer with a project. We got another developer coming in. Could be lots of different housing with impacts on the neighborhoods, the community there. We have Paseo Nuevo and constant talk about that should be housing. There's some other housing proposed for near downtown. Can you talk a little about your vision for housing and what kind of housing should we have? Where should we have it? Who should it be for?
Yeah, I definitely believe that we need more housing. We're in a housing crisis, and we created a specific task force to look into the options on how we can address that on the council. And the La Cumbre proposed housing, I've seen some drawings of it. It is big. It's going to be a lot of housing. I do wish that the other property owners there agreed to work with them so they could do it all at once. Because I just feel like that would be more efficient a way of doing it. Instead, now we're going to have like one piece developed and then the other ones, who knows when they're going to be developed, and it's not going to match the architecture that they're going to be proposing, and it's going to create a lot of issues. I hope that they kind of change their mind. I know some of them are stuck with some leases that they've agreed to, but maybe some kind of compromise could be done. Because I feel like that whole location is pretty suitable for a large housing development. But we do have to be careful because of the surrounding neighborhoods. They're already, as it is, talking about how bad traffic is and how hard it is to get around there, especially during rush hour. So I need to hear more from city staff on how they're going to address that, because it could become a major problem, a major issue for just transportation and also the health of the people in the environment when it comes to the air quality and such. Because it's not that far from the freeway, and now we're just going to be inviting more vehicles to be there. It could be problematic. When it comes to the rest of the city, I was pretty upset when we weren't able to pass that memorandum on hotels. I really feel like we have enough hotels. We need whatever is available in the potential to be housing, because we're losing a lot. The school district reported that they have low enrollment, and that's sad, because that means that there aren't a lot of families here, and it's probably because there's no housing, so we need to make sure that the housing that we do allow is affordable, and not just market rate or luxury. We need to make sure that regular working people can live here, and we got to pass laws that ensure that. So right now, we're trying to convince fellow council members to have the conversation about rent stabilization again, or having vacancy taxes and being more aggressive with short-term rentals, because all of that is affecting the ability for people to live here, and also talking to business owners about paying livable wages, and we're trying to do that as well on the city council, making sure that our employees can live comfortably here, because we all know it's super expensive. So yeah, that's how I feel about housing so far.
Was it you who suggested a vacancy tax on second homes? Am I making that up, or was it on vacant buildings? I thought there was some talk about.
I have brought up having a vacancy tax on. It was mainly on State Street businesses, because in my district specifically on the 400 block, there's that old ESOS building. I think it's going on 20 years now that it's been vacant. It's been boarded up. And every time I think about it, it just upsets me that how can those property owners just allow that to happen?
Right.
Like, I know there's complications. Apparently they might have passed away and it's like in the hands of their attorneys or their family. So like there's this weird thing going on, but it's been 20 years, like we should have something in place that can stop that from happening, because that's a potential storefront or maybe even housing, but instead it's just vacant.
Yeah. And not to put a judgment on, people shop there, they shop there, but that porn shop, that adult bookstore shop is,
yeah, that's
it's
staple.
an odd thing for downtown State Street, especially with the internet. Like is that the best use for this valuable land? I mean, I guess it makes money, but it's odd.
Yeah, I've questioned it being there as well, and people have told me it's a staple of the community. It's been there since before I was born, but I don't know. I mean, people go in there on bachelorette parties and they claim to have a good time. So I guess they're making money. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how they're making their money, to be honest. Because like you said, because of the internet, it makes me question like who's actually physically going to these stores anymore. But yeah, it's still there.
Well, you have that massage place, which, a lot of people get their massages, whatever. You got that place, you got the ESOS building, there's like a smoke shop. But then you have that restaurant place that the Cajun Kitchen Juan Jimenez had for a while, and it seems to turn over a lot. So
yeah,
it's hard to make something work when you've got kind of a cluster. And again, no judgment on their businesses, but it's just an odd place to be on State Street.
Yeah,
sure.
people. It's why I get really passionate about the 400 block, because people have described it as the walkthrough block, and they've used the phrase like seedy. And I really don't like that, because I've almost met every business owner there, and they're good people, and it just so happens that over the decades that those businesses have been established there, and now it's hard for them to leave, and yeah, I do agree that, it's been called, the 400 block's been called like the gateway into State Street, and it does need more attention, which is why I'm always pressing staff to give it a little more attention. But I can't help but wonder if like maybe subliminally they feel like because of the reputation I guess that block has, they don't give it as much attention as they should, or I wish they could.
Yeah. Can you imagine if we talked about the 400 block as much as we talk about Coast Village Road? I mean,
Right.
Coast Village Road is great, and it's obviously bigger and different, but your point is, hey, just because we've always ignored it doesn't mean we need to continue to ignore it.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask you about you and elections. So you are coming up on an election year. I know with district elections, things got a little weird in terms of people getting extra years, but I believe you're running next year. Tell us about your plans going forward, and why do you want to continue to serve on the west side?
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be running next year, and I just want to keep representing my neighborhood that raised me, and representing the city as a whole. I want to keep making sure people feel like their elected representatives are being responsive to them and taking them seriously. One thing that I really appreciated out of the budget hearings was I had made a comment about how in the past I've tried to have town halls, and city staff had told us that we would have to pay to use our city facilities. Like if we wanted to use a city park or one of the event buildings, we would have to pay for it. And I was kind of always caught off guard by that, because I'm trying to have like a public forum for the people. But I understand why, because we do have to hire city staff to maintain those facilities. But, Mike Jordan came in out of nowhere and was like, well, give us more money then, give us an extra $1,000 so that we could rent out these spaces and do it. And I was like, wow, that's cool. Like, Mike took it seriously, you know, and I appreciate that. And we approved it. So now we're going to be able to have more town halls to address the needs of the people. And that's something I'm really looking forward to in my next term, is just being there for them even more, and giving them more attention that they feel like they need. And yeah, I just want to make sure some of these projects go through, like what's going to happen with our city parks, and making sure that you know, I asked for more trees on the west side, and we're planting more trees. I asked for more lighting, and more lighting's going in. So I want to do more. Like the big issue right now that's been brought up is two. One is parking, just like the lack of parking and the problems that come from street sweeping, where people are just kind of switching out their cars and playing this like follow the leader situation. So I want to work with the community members and city staff to come up with a plan to better address that. And then the second thing is the unpermitted food vendors that have been coming up. That's another issue that is new and it's recent, and we're trying to address it. We're working with the county. We're working with our state officials to try to come up with a plan, because it's not so much that we're against street vending. We're not. We're just against not having it be permitted, because they're not okayed by the health department, and they're not from here. They're not from our community. They're coming up from LA. And I know this because I've personally spoken to them, each and every one of them. I've gone and spoken to them in Spanish and asked them, like, where are you from? I've offered to fill out the paperwork for them, and they've ignored me. And that to me is a red flag, and it's just rude and disrespectful. Because the legal street vendors that we have in our community, they live here and they have their kids going to our schools. They're going to our clinics. They're paying their taxes, and they're upset. They're coming to us and saying, what are you doing about this? Like, we actually live here. Like, please help us. Like, they're taking away our business. And I take that really personally, because it's not easy for them to do what they're doing either, you know, and it's not fair for someone just to come in and do what they want and ignore the law and it's just head out. So we're trying to come up with a plan to try to address it without violating anybody's rights.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love those street vendors. You know, you get a fruit cup, fruit bowl. You know, they'll carve it up for you right there, you know, in front of you, and they serve an important role. However, if you go through the process and you're permitted and you're local and you're part of this community, it can be very, I guess, maddening if somebody from LA just comes up and cuts into your business. So that's definitely a thing in our community. But Councilman Oscar Gutierrez, I really appreciate your time and speaking candidly and sharing your views on all of these issues. You are a role model for people, regardless of whether you see yourself as one or not, but you are Mexican American who's been elected to the city council. And I remember those days you were kind of unsure, like, should I do it? Should I not do it? You know, it's a risk. You run the chance of losing, and then you have that stain on you. But you tried it and you did it, and you're somebody there who is in one of the most influential positions in terms of government there is, and you do so much to advocate for the people of the West Side, you know, all over the community, even the East Side. And so it's great to see you on the council. And, you know, I've watched your evolution, you know, back when you were at TVSB, and I was over there for Jerry's show, and, you know, watching you play out. And it's stunning to think you'll be running for a second term. Like how fast time goes by. So not that you need my advice, but my only advice to you is, and I cover you, you know, sometimes I write about you and you don't like it, and that's just the way it is. But my advice to you is, you know, stop apologizing, stop worrying about, you know, how people are going to perceive you, and make the biggest impact you can. Because before you know it, we're going to be 4 years away and you're going to be done. And so you might as well just leave the biggest, strongest legacy you can, because people will look at you going forward and saying, I want to be like that guy. And that's important as well. Thanks a lot for your.
Well, thanks for what you're doing too. I know it's hard for you to do your job at times, so I appreciate it. Even though sometimes I don't agree with the way that you present things, but that's still that's the greatness of journalism, you know.
Exactly. And that's the back and forth is, I do my thing, you do your thing, sometimes I don't like what you're doing. Sometimes I don't like what I'm doing, but we're all doing it because we, of course, want to be impactful in the community.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot, Oscar. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you, Josh.